We have divided taxpayers into tax residents and non-tax residents, but it's not enough. It's necessary to subdivide these two types of taxpayers. Why? Although generally, an individual who is China tax resident is taxed on worldwide income, whereas a China non-tax resident is liable to income only arising in China. But some special cases should be considered in tax practice. Firstly, let's talk about tax residents. We've known that in two scenarios, an individual is considered as a tax resident. One scenario is a China tax resident who has domicile in China. We don't need to subdivide this scenario. Here are his or her tax responsibilities. Incomes, including salaries and wages, sourced from China and abroad shall be subject to IIT wherever they are paid in China or overseas. This is the first scenario. And the second scenario. The second scenario is China tax resident who does not have domicile in China, but the days of residence occurred here for 183 days or more. For tax residents in this scenario, we need to continue to divide them into two groups. One group resided in China for 183 days or more for 6 consecutive tax years, and during his or her stay in China, he or she did not have one-off exit for leave of over 30 consecutive days in any of the 6 tax years mentioned above. This is the first group. For this group, the tax responsibilities is incomes including salaries and wages sourced from China and abroad shall be subject to IIT wherever they are paid in China or overseas. We can see this group is the same as the first scenario. And the second group resided in China for less than 183 days in any of the preceding 6 years. Or has one-off exit for a leave of over 30 consecutive in any of the preceding 6 years. For this group, tax responsibilities generally, incomes sourced from China and abroad shall be subject to IIT, but income sourced and paid or borne by overseas entities or individuals shall be exempt from China IIT. Where we have subdivided tax residents and clarified their tax obligations. Now, let's continue to talk about non-tax residents. We've known that in two scenarios, an individual is considered as a non-tax resident. One scenario is an individual who does not have domicile in China and never resides in China. The other scenario is an individual who does not have domicile in China but resides in China and the days of residence within China less than 183 days in a calendar year. Never residing within China means that the days of residence is 0. So, in this table, I combine two scenarios of non-tax residents as follows. China tax resident who does not have domicile in China. Days of residence in current year less than 183 days. For non-tax residents, we need to continue to divide them in two groups. One group is Days of residence in current year, not more than 90 days. For this group, tax responsibilities generally only incomes sourced from China shall be subject to IIT, but there are two exceptions. Salaries and wages sourced from China and paid borne by overseas employers shall be exempt. This policy is to narrow down the scope of obligations on a regular basis. Another exception: salaries and wages of senior management officers sourced from abroad but paid or borne by Chinese employers shall be subject to IIT. This policy is to expand the scope of obligations on a normal basis. Another group: days of residence in current year, less than 183 days, more than 90 days. For this group, tax responsibilities generally only incomes sourced from China shall be subject to IIT, but there's an exception. Salaries and wages of senior management officers sourced from abroad but paid or borne by Chinese employers shall be subject to IIT in China. This policy is to expand the scope of obligation on a normal basis. Above, we have subdivided tax residents and non-tax residents and clarified their tax obligations. Finally, we move on to the third question of this chapter, determining sources of income. Generally, a tax resident is taxed on worldwide income, whereas a non-tax resident is taxed only on income arising in China. Then, the relevant question is here: which income are sourced from China and which income are sourced from abroad? The following types of income, regardless of whether payments are made within China, should be treated as income sourced from China. Number 1. Income derived from provision of labor services such as employment, contractual relationships, etc. in China. And number 2. Rental income derived from leasing of assets which are used in China. And number 3. Income derived from transfer of immovable assets, land use rights, or other assets which locate in China. And number 4. Royalty income from use rights or license used in China. Number 5. Interest, dividend, and bonuses income derived from investment in enterprises, public institutions, and other economic organizations, or from resident individuals which locate in China. At this point, I have finished the content of this chapter. In this chapter, I have explained which individuals belong to the taxpayers of China's individual income tax, which two types of taxpayers can be divided, and how to subdivide those two types of taxpayers to clarify their tax obligations. And finally, explained how to distinguish whether income comes from within China or outside China. Welcome to my course. Don't forget to comment and subscribe. See you next time.